welcome Amanda here to talk about Interlibrary Loan for just a second. And there's some information on the screen here for you. So, hi Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Masaccio, the Resource Sharing Specialist here at Rails. And I wanted to alert everyone to the upcoming annual Illinois State Library certification process. It takes place January 3rd to March 31st. At the end of December, your libraries will be receiving an email containing information on how to complete the annual certification process, which is necessary to maintain your Rails membership. Like last year, completion of the Illinois Interlibrary Loan and Reciprocal Borrowing Traffic Survey is a requirement of the certification process. So please complete that before you complete certification. New this year, the Illinois Traffic Survey has been redesigned to be easier to complete, and it will include some questions regarding interlibrary loan delivery. And here we have some links to the Illinois Traffic Survey. The traffic survey is available now to complete ahead of the certification process if you want to get a head start on that. And again, the certification portal will be open from January 3rd, and it must be completed by March 31st. So please complete that early so we will not have to call and bother you. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. And Amanda's contact information is there on the screen, and a link to some training videos that she made about ILL as well. So thanks, Amanda. So now I'm going to turn things over to Kurt. Are you there, Kurt? Welcome.
I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
I can hear you just fine, yep.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and change the presenter controls to you.
Okay. So hopefully everybody sees my screen now.
Yes.
Okay. Great. So I'm Kurt Munson, Northwestern University. I'm the Assistant Head of Access Services for System Integration and Branch Library Services. Interlibrary Loan is part of what fits into that, and what I want to talk about today is some ideas to do workflow redesign in Interlibrary Loan to help your patrons and yourselves do your jobs better. Before we get into that, I want to give you a little bit more information about what my situation is and what we do for people in libraries here at Northwestern. Last fiscal year, we lent out about 45,000 things, and that number went out to about 2,000 different distinctive libraries, which means that we help about 2,000 partners meet their customers' needs. On the borrowing side, we requested about 40,000 items in all sorts of formats, and those we borrowed to meet the needs of about 4,300 people here at Northwestern, faculty, staff, and students. And I should say that that's just up here on our Evanston campus. That doesn't count what our law school is doing or the medical school down in Chicago, nor does it count our campus over in Doha, Qatar. And then we scanned or found about 4,000 items that we owned locally for our patrons, and that helped out about 940 people. So those could be construed as being some fairly large numbers, and certainly some of the things that we need to do here at a private institution are going to be different than what you would need to do at your institution, but workflow redesign is something that everybody can do to help themselves and help their patrons. So I'd like to start by getting a little bit better idea of who's out there listening to me talk, because all I see is my presentation on my screen. I don't see any of you. So I've given Louise 3 demographic questions to start out with, and if she wants to go ahead and pop those up.
Okay, the first one is just launched, and it's what type of library do you work in, and you can go ahead and choose. I imagine it's probably most public. If you don't see your type of library on the list, I would just go ahead and click special, and I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So, Kurt, it looks like about 95% of our audience are from public libraries, and we've got 2% from colleges or universities, 2% from community colleges, and 2% special. And I imagine school libraries might fall under that special.
Right, totally forgot about school libraries. Apologies to the school libraries.
That's okay. So, yeah, so predominantly we've got public library staff in the audience today. But nice to see a representation. Do you want me to do the next poll?
If you would, please.
Okay. So this one is, how many years have you worked in interlibrary loan? If it's less than 1, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, or 10 or more. And I'll give it a few seconds to give people a chance to vote. Everyone's being real quick with the buttons today. So. All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So it looks like 13% have less than 1 year experience working in ILL. About 37% have 1 to 5 years experience. 17% have 5 to 10 years experience. And a third, 33%, have 10 or more years experience. So that's really great.
Yeah, we've got a nice bell curve there. So I'm one of the 33%.
All right.
So, okay, you want to move on to that last question?
Yes. And then this one is, have you done anything with workflow redesign in the past? And you can just choose yes or no. And I'll give it just a couple more seconds. People are being real quick to vote today, which is good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results. So 32% has said yes, they have done some workflow redesign in the past, and 68% have not. So thank you, everybody, for sharing that.
Yes, thank you. That actually makes it much easier for me to talk about things. So shout out to all the public libraries. There are some things that you do in public libraries that would really be great if academic libraries, especially large ones, learned how to do the same things. It's also cool to see that we've got a variety of experience of people with how long that they've been working in interlibrary loan. There are those people like myself that have a fairly long history of doing this sort of thing. There are other people that are newer. Everybody can contribute. People that are newer can often come in and have great ideas and go, well, why do you do it that way? And then those of us that have been doing it for forever can say, because we tried doing it that other way and the entire world fell apart and there's no software to fix it, and so on and so forth. So everybody can contribute to this sort of stuff. And I'm glad to see that we've got about a third of the people that have done workflow redesign before, or will say that they've done workflow redesign. I suspect that the other 68 of you have probably done workflow redesign before, but you just don't really know exactly how broadly we could define that. So what I want to do now is just sort of do a quick overview of what I'm hoping to cover today. And if anybody has any questions as I'm going through this, please feel free to type something into the chat. Louise will be paying attention to that, and she'll be interrupting me. I want to make sure that if you have a question, we answer it when it comes up. And also, a lot of the time, if you've got a question, somebody else is going to have the same question. And there's always the possibility I forgot to explain something. So I want to start out with an introduction to what workflow analysis is and why we would do that. I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can identify things that will help us understand what we might want to do some workflow analysis on, how to know what needs attention. I'm going to concentrate mostly on the redesign process, the defining the scope of the work, and then actually how the work would be redone. We'll talk about outcomes, because it doesn't do a whole lot of good to just change something without seeing if that change worked properly and it had a positive impact. And then finally at the end, a bit of review, and then any final questions that people have. So the first thing I want to say is this is a process, not an event. To my mind, workflow redesign, whether it's interlibrary loan or anything else that we're doing, is really an ongoing process. It's not something where, oh, we've made this giant change and now we dust our hands off, walk away, and never go back to it. It really does have the opportunity to be an ongoing thing, depending on what the scope of that is. The workflow redesign process consists of 3 parts. We start out by reviewing our existing policies, procedures, and protocols to find areas where we're like, we could probably do this better, or that, oh no, I don't want to have to do this sort of, part of it, where we can look for improvement, and also we can look for ways of doing things that are just simpler. I think we have a tendency in libraries to make things possibly more complicated than they need to be, so we should always be aware of that. The second part of it, once we've identified what we want to do, is to define exactly what it is that we want that outcome to be, to detail out how we're going to get to that point, to do the actual implementation of the change, see how those go, and then assess whether they were effective, and if they're not, then we just go ahead and make adjustments as needed. So that's kind of what the process is. The idea behind doing workflow redesign is because we have opportunities to do things differently, and I found this a couple of days ago, and I just love this graphic because it's like 60 some odd years old, and it's like the first fax machine from the mid-60s, and I didn't even know that fax machines existed then. And then you've got this crazy way of attaching it to the telephone, and this notion of, mail letters over the phone, we have to translate something and say it in a way, but we've got a very different way of doing it, and that very much is, I think, what workflow redesign is. It's because things change. New tools are developed, which gives us newer and better and easier ways of doing things. Our priorities change in terms of what we're doing to serve our patrons. New opportunities present themselves. And ultimately, I think all of this is driven from the idea of improving services and giving us the opportunity to better meet our customers' needs. So, where to start? The first thing is to not panic. Note my lovely graphic that I found having to do entirely with Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the fact that the 42 is stuck in there. Frequently, it's one of those things where if somebody said, come up with a work redesign idea, I mean, you freeze because you don't really know exactly where to start. The project could seem to be too big, and it's also very possible to feel overwhelmed by it. But take a step back and remember that you've got places where you can find information and that can give you very good ideas of, what might be something that you needed to look at. We've got all sorts of statistics and data. Heck, at the beginning of this program, we were told that we have to report some statistics and data. So we have many sources of getting that. It could be OCLC, it could be our local system that we use. Rails is certainly a source of data, ILDS information. Iliad is an interlibrary loan management software that we use at larger institutions. I pull an awful lot of information out of that. So we have plenty of different sources for all of this. And those sources can give us data points. How many requests did we fill lending and borrowing? How many did we have to cancel? How many patrons did we help? What's our turnaround time getting something? Who are we sending our stuff out to? Who's sending their stuff to us? So on and so forth. So we have all sorts of pieces of information. And going through those can give you a sense of things that, were either A, going really well and are always good things to tell your boss and your director about, or other things where you could be doing things better, so you can do some work, redesign, make it better, and then tell your boss or your director all the awesome things that you're doing. But at this point, before we move on, I've got another poll question for you. So if Louise can pull that up, we'd be in great shape.
Yeah, I'm launching it now. So the question is, have you ever done user surveys?
Oh, actually, shouldn't we have question 4? Do you look at your statistics every month?
I have that as question 5.
Oh,
do you want
okay.
Me to...
Yeah, reverse them if you would. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Okay.
No worries.
All right.
And be honest when you answer it.
Let's try this again. Okay. So do you look at your statistics every month from OCLC, Iliad, consortial borrowing, etc.? And I'll give people a few more seconds to vote. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that out and share the results. So it said, people said that 78%, yes, they do look at their statistics every month, and 22% no.
Okay. Confession time. I don't look at my statistics every month. I mean, I look at them often.
And we did have a comment. Yeah, we did have a comment that there should be an option for sometimes.
Yeah, there should be a comment for sometimes, but unfortunately, if you're doing true-false questions, yeah, you don't get the option for that, which is more what I was looking at. Yay to all of you that do that on a regular basis. As I said, I'm not particularly good at doing that, but I've also got Iliad, so I can pull statistics as needed. And sometimes just looking at that number and doing that work will, the answer is just obviously right in front of my face. This is a graph of the total number of borrowing requests that we received in a period of about 2 weeks or so at the beginning of the quarter. The glaringly obvious spike on a couple of days. I mean, that spike occurs every time the quarter starts. It's the undergraduates ordering a whole bunch of stuff that they need for their classes. So, that's just it. It's a glaringly obvious thing, and it's something that I'm going to have to, keep in mind as I'm looking at what my staff are doing, because I can't have them going along doing their normal, being busy and doing their jobs, and then all of a sudden have this total craziness. So we'll come back to this crazy spike in a few minutes. But if Louisa, you can do the next question, which is the have you done user surveys one.
Gotcha. Okay. We had, I don't know if we can run this one again, but we had a bunch of people vote earlier when I loaded it up, and about 3/4, 74% said they had done user surveys, and 26% said no.
Great. Yeah. User surveys are a really super helpful tool to have a better idea of what's going on and to find out what is happening. And user feedback can be very important in the area of interlibrary loan because it tells us what works well for them, and then the things that cause friction for them are the things that we really are more interested in figuring out what we can do to address that, to minimize that friction, to make it easier. So when a patron asks, how do I do something, it's the question of how often do we get those questions, what population are we getting them from, and are we forever explaining something, or do we do it just occasionally? And then this is one of my favorite stories of going off and making a change with something because we thought it was going to fix a situation, and it just made it something else that we were not expecting completely horrible. Brief story. We have a particular database that does not handle certain things very well, but we get problems with it a couple of times a month. Not a particularly big deal, but we thought, okay, well, let's see if we make this change, if that's going to fix that problem and we won't have it anymore. Well, the problem is we changed that to deal with stuff that happens a couple of times a month and found out that we broke something involving music CDs and all types of AV material and scores and a whole bunch of other stuff, and we get requests for that stuff every single day. So something that, you know, was going to do 10 things a month suddenly broke hundreds of things per month, and our music cataloger, Morris, is the one that brought this to my attention, and we had to figure it out. And what we were getting there was a lot of feedback, both from the staff and from the users, that this thing that we'd fixed, you know, broke other things. So not a good workflow redesign, and something that we promptly changed back to what it had been before. So I've got another question, I believe, at this point. Louisa, so can you put that poll up?
Is this the one about the pain point?
Yeah. And this, for those of you that are following along in the audience, is a type in and answer one.
Right. So the question was, do you have any pain points for your staff? And I imagine, Kurt, you mean like things that are causing problems in the interlibrary loan workflow?
Absolutely, absolutely. Those sorts of things where, you know, the staff or yourself, you get a request for something and you just look at it and go, but I don't want to have to deal with this, or, you know, just points where it's almost like, you know, there's got to be an easier, better way of doing this.
Okay, so yeah, so if there's anything, you know, like that happening at your libraries, you know, Kurt and I would like to hear about it. So you can go ahead and type those in the questions box, and I'll read a few and share them. So the first person said that their ILL person just retired and wasn't great at teaching, so they're having some trouble with OCLC issues. Another person said microfilm is a pain point. Another trouble spot is staff members placing requests for items that aren't published yet. Some trouble requesting articles. So they're great comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a few more here too. Understanding whether there are charges for an OCLC request or not. There's multiple records for the same item, too much paperwork. Patrons don't understand the difference between consortium holds and OCLC WorldCat holds, and then deciding whether or not to purchase or borrow. High turnover of staff, so constantly sending out reminders about how to do things. ILL modules and OCLC. I mentioned that's ILL modules in the cataloging software does not work well with OCLC. So lots of issues there, Kurt.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots of issues, and you know that we deal with all of these at basically I think, and for those of you that have been doing interlibrary loan for those 10 or more years, I don't think I'm hearing anything that's radically different than a lot of stuff that I've heard over time. But that does not mean that we can't do stuff to mitigate and work through things. And before I flip to my next slide where I want to talk more about user surveys and user feedback, well, actually, you know, pain points for the staff, much of that is informed by what our users tell us, and we need to look at this from the standpoint of we do this work stuff every day, or every day that we're at work we do it. Patrons don't library every day. We come into their lives when they have a need that they think we're going to be able to meet. So we need to figure out if it's a process that that patron or that person who works at the library is unfamiliar with, because at that point we're dealing with something that's an issue of education or explaining. If we get the same questions over and over and over and over, and you explain something to the staff and they look at you like you were speaking, Han Chinese or something, then we probably have an overcomplicated and hard to use system. And that's the point where we want to look at workflow analysis. Yeah, people that leave and didn't document things well, that can actually be an awesome opportunity to do workflow redesign, because in part you can, but I don't know how to do this. It wasn't written down. I want to figure it out, but if you make a mistake, that's totally fine. And also you could figure out some stuff that maybe doesn't need to be done anymore. Microfilm, I hate microfilm. Almost as much as I hate microfiche and I hate microcard, most of all of them, it's just really annoying, but unfortunately there's a ton of stuff out there. I've always said, and I used to work at the medical library, so it was like all journal articles all the time. If you can get to 85% correct with serial literature and articles, you're in amazingly good shape. New items are always a challenge. Charges are not to charge. And how that works is always something of a question. And yeah, that whole issue of multiple records in OCLC or whatever else, I mean, it's so difficult to explain that to somebody, and that's just one of the things that, over time we need to learn. But a lot of these things that are pain points are things that probably potentially need a little bit more work on the part of staff as they're going through things. And may or may not be the sort of things that we can do work redesign for. Work redesign is unfortunately never going to fix absolutely everything for us, but what it is supposed to do is take and make the things that we do all the time easier, so we can spend more time fighting with, figuring out which one of the multiple records for that book is in fact the one that I should be ordering off of. So, check with your staff and let them know what their areas of concern are. We do the work day to day, and Northwestern has a large music school. We have a big theater department, and we have a lot of TV, radio, and film stuff going on too. So we use an awful lot of music and scores and so on and so forth. And from my staff, this is a really good example. Scores are a great big huge giant pain in the neck, as are CDs of classical music. I actually went and looked in WorldCat, and there's like 700 sound recordings and 200-ish scores for Beethoven's Ninth, and you get a request for Beethoven's Ninth, and just like, but which one of these 900 do you want? I don't know. So it's these sorts of things where we look at and say, we do this all the time, let's try to come up with a way of making this easier. And that takes us into the whole area of the actual work redesign. And the idea behind work redesign is to describe the place that you want to be in. So if you want to be better at ordering, or you want to make things easier when you're ordering using OCLC and WorldCat, get some training for that. Find other places that use it a lot. If there's other stuff, do that. If you're not particularly, familiar with, how to do articles, find out where the patrons are finding those originally. Look at that sort of thing, so on and so forth. Work through that, but describe where it is that you want to be. And this is my play on Voltaire's Candide. In that most perfect of all perfect worlds, it would do this sort of thing. And we use a tool called user stories frequently to inform both the staff and the products that we use. And we look at these from the standpoint of everybody and all the things that are involved in this. Yeah, we start with, who's doing it. We have staff that are working on it. We have patrons that are discovering things. Where are they discovering those things? What information are they telling you about those things when they've discovered them? How do the various systems interact with each other, and what do they do? When this whole process of an interlibrary loan is happening, how are we doing that? Is it manual staff processing? There's some stuff that just has to be manual. Because if we've got multiple records in OCLC and we have to choose one, that's your skills and your brain as a library staff member working on it, figuring it out. Other stuff we can just automate away. I would caution people from using magical nuclear-powered unicorns to get things done. I find them to be extremely inefficient, and it's probably one of those situations where we would love to make something handle all of this stuff for us, but we can't write the technology for it. It doesn't exist yet. And then we have to keep in mind why whoever is doing whatever they're doing. In the case of the patron, it's an information need or want, and they've identified a resource that they're looking for things on. In our case, the staff of the libraries, it's a service that we provide, or it's part of what our job is. And whoever made the comment about somebody recently retiring and not being clear on OCLC and a lot of stuff not being documented, and I said this could be an excellent time for workflow redesign. Changes can always be a chance to do things and take a fresh look and do them differently than we've done them in the past. Because there is kind of this sense of, because we've always done it this way due to and this is being sarcastic and fully owning that, due to a minor problem that happened in 1974, and we must forever guard against it. We are inherently cautious in libraries, I think. We're concerned that something could go wrong. I think we need to be mindful of that. There are certainly points when we should be cautious. There are other points where we just need to send it off, and if it doesn't work, then we'll fix it later. Okay. So I think we've got a couple. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you go back and talk what you mean about magical nuclear-powered unicorn?
Sure. There's a certain point, I think, where there are certain aspects of processing things that we just wish would go away, and we could wave a magic wand and they would just sort of get taken care of without staff work. Or there are also certain points where sometimes patrons think we're amazingly skilled at doing things and we just simply can't do that. So I put magical nuclear-powered unicorns in here to sort of describe that wanted but really not possible because it just doesn't exist sort of thing. Does that make more sense?
Okay. Yeah, one of our attendees had asked, so if she needs to follow up, she'll chime in. So
sure,
thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess an example of a magical nuclear-powered unicorn. I'll bring that back as an example of something that replaced where the magical nuclear-powered unicorn could also be a situation where the technology just simply does not exist, sort of thing. So, okay. I think we've got a couple more questions at this point.
Yeah. Did you want me the one about user stories?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the next poll I'm launching now is asking if you have experience with user stories. And it's just yes or no. And I'll give a few more seconds for everyone to vote. All right. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll out. Thank you for clicking away. And the results are, Kurt, 21% said yes, they have experience with user stories, and 79% said no.
Excellent. That's actually more than I expected with people having experience with user stories, so that's actually really cool.
And we had a question pop up. Actually, a couple people are wondering, can you explain what you mean by user stories?
Yes, I will when we get to actually the next screen.
The next slide?
Yeah, the next slide will explain that, but before we go to that slide, let's ask question 8, in part because that will semi-partially answer it, or it will at least give me a better sense of how I should answer it.
All right, and this is the one about explaining processes, right?
Yep, yep.
Okay. Okay, so the next poll is if you have experience explaining processes to people with no experience in that type of work. And we've got some people voting. It's just yes or no. And all right, we've had a good number of votes, so I'm going to go ahead and close that out and show the results. So for this one, 86% of people said yes, and 14% said no.
Great. Yes, if you can successfully explain something to somebody that doesn't do it all the time and do that in a way that they understand it, you are miles and miles and miles ahead. So that's all very good. So the question was, what are user stories? And I've kind of got, user stories 101 is up on my screen, and hopefully everybody else can see that.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And basically the idea behind a user story is you start out and you tell what you want to have happen. So I insert type of user, patron, library staff member, whoever, want, whatever that thing is, so that I can, and then why ever I want this and what is my outcome going to be. It's a very simple, but it's a very powerful way of explaining things, and it's something that we use a great deal when we're working with developers on creating software and so on and so forth. And since a lot of what I do is working to make the systems talk to each other, I spend a lot of time saying, but this system can do this, and I need it to tell this other system this other thing, so that then that second system can store that data in it. In fact, I was doing that this morning. So here's a more concrete example. A patron wants to read a book that my library owns, but our copy is checked out. So again, we're creating this statement in this sort of I user type want thing, so I can whatever. Simple example. But what this, so we start out by saying what it is that we want to do, and then we step back and we describe what the current situation is. Because if we have an outcome that we want to reach, we number one have to be able to define that. We then need to say, where are we currently? What is the system that exists? So we can identify what we need to change or redesign so that we can get to that desired state. So again, patron needs a book, but our locally owned copy is checked out. And what I'm doing here is I'm describing the actual workflow that the patron's going through, and what happens to that request as it follows through its life. So the patron clicks on an ILL link in the catalog that auto-populates a request form which the patron submits. And you'll see over here there's the little option for ILL at NU, and that's going to take all the information about this book, pop it into there, fill out the form. Then the next step of that, because what we're doing is defining the current situation, is my staff then turn around and double check the catalog to see if the book is available locally and then place an ILL request for the patron. If you think about this workflow-wise, it is positively ridiculous and stupid because the patron started in the local catalog, the item is not available in the local catalog, so of course they're going to request an interlibrary loan book or go without. So there's no point in having the staff double check the catalog because that catalog is only Northwestern stuff, and if there are no copies, we can't get them any copy. So this is really not a very effective workflow for us. The desired situation, on the other hand, and this is what we're defining, is the point once we do the workflow redesign or we make the change is what we want the situation to be. And that situation is nobody reviews the request. It's sent out automatically. So this is one of those points where when I was, introducing the notion of the magical nuclear unicorns, this is one of those points where until we had technology and software to automatically send the requests out and to automatically check all of the requests against the local catalog, we still had to duplicate this work for things where the patron started out in the local catalog. There was a gap, there was a hole here where we needed the magical nuclear unicorn to be created, or actually web services to be created, so that we didn't have to do this portion of the work. But what we're doing is defining a desired outcome, and this was a long-term process. It took quite a while to get to the point of actually having this. So once we've defined what the desired outcome is, we go into that vacuum in the middle, that stuff that doesn't exist to redo that work. We define and describe in detail how that desired state is going to work. And we need to have the details here because we need to know how all of the ducks are going to line up into a row to make sure that this is in fact actually going to work and work properly. Plus it also gives me this wonderful opportunity to have this ridiculous thing of a tree insulting a vacuum cleaner. So, flowcharts can be very helpful for figuring this out. And this is looking at this work from the standpoint of a patron, because ultimately all of these requests and that crazy giant spike that I showed you in the data slide a while back all start out by patron requests. So, patron looks to see if Northwestern owns the book. They search our catalog news search. Is it on the shelf? No, it's not available. So what they're going to do is click on that ILL link. They're going to submit the form, and then for the patron, they're sitting and waiting. But it's this waiting period where behind the scenes we were able to set up automation that automatically sends those requests out without staff intervention. And this was an important thing for us to do because A, we have that giant spike at the beginning of each one of our 3 quarters. Number 2, about 20%, if not more, of the stuff that we order on Interlibrary Loan is stuff that we own a copy, but ours is already checked out because everybody needs that book, or because a whole bunch of people right at that period of time need that book. So what we needed to be able to do is to automate the sending of those requests. We were able to do that by introducing a system where our local holdings were checked automatically, and if the item was not available locally, we then needed to have some way of sending that into our consortial borrowing system, which we were able to do by some software that Atlas Systems built for our Iliad for the Big Ten Academic Alliance, i.e. that's the Big Ten. And then if it was unavailable through our consortial system in the Big Ten, it would automatically dump it into OCLC and send it out through direct request. So, multi-year project, big thing for us, but really something very major that we felt we needed to be able to do. And you're probably sitting there going, but Kurt, we're never ever going to do anything that complicated. We just aren't that big, so on and so forth. This is a complicated example, absolutely, but it was something that for us, for the volume that we do, was important, and also because we don't have a good consortial borrowing system like so many of you in public libraries have. Congratulations. You're in a much better position than we are, so you don't have to do all that work. But you're also the customers too, and there's lots of little tiny things that we can do, you know, almost like micro enhancements that make stuff much easier, and a lot of those are work redesign things that, you know, you can just do yourself. For example, when we send stuff back to the owning library, we put the ILDS code on it. So when that slip prints, automatically that's just there because we included it in our information about the library. So it can be very simple, and you're also the customers too. Things that make your job easier will make things better for your patrons. So I think we've got another question coming up.
We do. Before I launch the poll, I've got a question that came through, Kurt.
Sure.
When you implemented that direct request style process to your for your patrons, did that increase your statistics?
Increase our statistics in what way? The total number of requests we were filling, or did it improve our fill rate?
It wasn't. The question wasn't that specific. It just said, did you find that your stats drastically increased after implementing the direct request style process? And then actually, she just followed up. She asked about the number of requests submitted by patrons. Did that number go up?
The number did not go up, but 40,000 is a pretty large number to start out with, and if we're helping about 4,000, what did I say earlier, 4,300 people out of a population of, let's say, 20,000, we're already hitting 25% of our total population using the service. So I wasn't particularly concerned about it going up, and the thing is, if it had gone up, we weren't going to say no to the people anyway. The main thing that it did for us is it reduced staff processing time. So it became one of those questions of the balance of, okay, if this becomes easier to do, I can probably do more of it. So we implemented it, and we actually didn't notice anything.
All right. Okay. That's all the questions I have. So the next poll was about the overdue notices, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm launching the next poll, and the question is, who sends lending overdue notices automatically? And it's just a yes or no question. And I'll give everyone a few more seconds to vote. Almost done. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So 55% said yes, they do send lending overdue notices automatically, and 45% said no.
Cool. Yay to the 55%, thank you. Because I think lending overdue notices, and there are points when there is a value to a lending overdue notice, like, the thing is now basically for all intents and purposes lost, and if you don't give it back to us, we're going to have to send you a bill. That makes perfect sense. But the reminders, hey, the book is going to be due soon, that you're sending to a library, and I think larger academics are particularly horrible at doing this because it's automated and we don't think about it because it just happens, but I think all we end up doing is bothering people, including our other big academics. So my idea behind this is let's just do the work that we need to do. And let's say that I was another large academic institution that runs the Iliad software. And we're going to use if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it sort of idea. So the other large lending academic institution sends me a lending overdue email to my borrowing staff to go, hey, the book that you borrowed from us is going to be due soon. But we at the same time have already sent our patron an overdue notice saying, hey, look, you borrowed this on Interlibrary Loan, it's due soon, either renew it or send it back to us. So we're already doing that, and then the borrowing staff is spending all this time deleting emails when they could be doing other things, and I don't have a single piece of data that shows that any of those lending emails get books back any faster from my patrons. Send us a bill, and let me tell you, the person's going to be in the office in roughly 2 seconds after they get the email on their phone, sort of thing. Naturally explaining that they brought it back, you know, at 7:43 p.m. they spoke to so-and-so and they had, you know, blah blah for dinner and whatever, because patrons and overdues always don't seem to work well. But I mean, this is just one of these things where it's like, you know, I feel like we're flooding all of these things out to people and then they're just being ignored because it's not useful, and yet it doesn't take any effort on my part as a lender to send it to you, but then you have to delete all that stuff, and maybe we could just not do it instead so that we could spend some time doing more of the work that we actually need to do. And this is why I started out by saying we're looking at processes, protocols, and policies on things. You know, one of the things that we did a couple of months ago is we just jacked our standard lending loan period up by 4 weeks. We increased it by that much. And we did that because we figured, A, we get a whole bunch of renewal requests anyway, even though it was a 60-day loan period. And if your patron still needs the thing, we want it in their hands so that they're using it as opposed to it sitting on the shelves gathering dust here. But the main thing was expanding that meant that the staff could stop processing those renewal requests, because unfortunately there wasn't any way to really automate that well with the way that OCLC and Iliad talk to each other. You know, somebody raised charges as, you know, a pain point earlier. Another thing that we will do is, you know, if we get a request from a library that, you know, we don't know at all, we haven't worked with them in the past, you know, particularly if it's for a scan or a journal article, we'll just send it to them and not bother to send them an invoice because of the cost of what it to process an invoice and to cut a check and so on and so forth. And we'll particularly do that if they're, you know, someplace outside of the U.S. Because it's just not worth it to go back and forth and have 7 emails about how should we pay. Well, we're Italian and we ran out of IFLA vouchers and blah 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 blah. I'm just like, you know, send it, be done with it, because we've now wasted more money in staff time than we're ever going to recoup. The next one is one that drives me crazy. Overuse of conditional messages in OCLC, and since some people may not be 100% familiar with conditionals, it's basically a way of going back and forth within OCLC to say, you've requested this, oh, by the way, it's 20 volumes, which volumes do you want? And then you can just respond back. Or to say, we can't find this the way that it's cited, there's a problem with the article, go back to your patron. to be able to, say this, that, and the other thing with those messages. But if it's something that you can't send because it's in special collections, or you're a college and it's on the reserve shelf for that quarter or semester, or it's checked out, just say no to the request on OCLC. I'm glad that you want to fill the requests that we've asked for, and I'm sure that if you say no, you have a reason for saying no, but you don't need to conditional me the reason for that. Just stop it. Just say no, let it go on to the next place. It's less work for both of us, and because we're not spending our time doing that, it moves it through the process faster, getting it to a library that will be able to say yes, and also a library, and that will then get it into the hands of the patron that wants it faster, or period, frankly, at all.
Kurt?
Yes.
Kurt, we had a comment. One of our attendees disagrees with that, saying that sometimes it's good to know the reason why a book won't be lent. Maybe it's checked out at the moment and the request can be submitted at a later time.
There also should be reasons for no in OCLC that would handle that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wanted to share that.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea here is use your standard way of, if there's a mechanism in place to handle stuff, use that. But certainly in situations where, if you're the last one in the lender or you're the only one that owns it, a conditional to say, hey, we can't do this right now, or this is in special collections, you need to contact so on and so forth. I mean, do that. But again, these are special situations where we would need to use those tools as opposed to doing things in a different way. And then we've got, and this is a total shout out to the public libraries, you so get this, you so don't overcomplicate it the way large academics can do. I'm thinking of one particular one that we're reciprocal with. Every time we request a DVD, they conditional it and they come back and say, in library use only, 2-week loan, you have to put it in a box, blah, 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 blah. Books get wet and moldy after they're wet. That's just what happens. Plastic you can dry off with a towel. Just send it on. But let's try to do just the work that we need to do with things and keep it simple. So those are some ideas, a couple of examples of things. So you make your change. The next thing you need to do is make sure it actually worked. Assess it. Look at that change. Did it fix what you wanted it to do? And I love this tweet from a couple of weeks ago because it has the word evidence in it, and I think when we make changes we need to have evidence, particularly if it's a more major change, or if it's going to take more resources to make that change, or if there's the potential for resistance to it. And again, we can go back and look at our stats. We can look at the way we've done things. Is it faster? Is it worth it? Are we looking at fewer errors? How can we prove this, and how can we tell that? So in the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip two of the questions that I had, which were who has experience with or has done some sort of assessment in your library, and then also some examples of that. You all seem to have a lot more experience with things, and I don't want to try to reinvent the wheel. So what I'm going to do is just give you some of the examples of things that we went through here based upon those workflow redesigns that I'd shown you, so we can move through this. So the first question is, is it faster? Let's go back to that crazy peak at the beginning of fall quarter of this year. when we send out a large number of requests for loans, and those loans are successfully filled, the item is going, is going to show up, and somebody will need to notify the patron, process the item, and put it on the shelf for pickup. I can't get rid of that work. We're dealing with physical items. On the other hand, if I can get that request to go out unmediated, so no staff member needs to touch it initially, that's going to save time, and then that's going to give the staff to free up staff time for them to spend processing stuff when it physically gets here. Or in the case of right now, when all of that stuff after the quarter's done is being sent back to the owning libraries. So we've got that crazy peak, and right around that first week of September, of the quarter back in September, we were able to send out over 4 days 205 requests that we otherwise would have had to process manually. So this is an absolute, no-brainer math-wise, because 0 is always less than something larger, and if the staff don't have to process those but they go out successfully, that's obviously a major workflow improvement for us. So nice, good, strong example, and made all of the work that we've done worthwhile with that. Another question is it worth it to do this? If we took a workflow and we made it slightly more complicated, is it worth the return on that? And rather than actually doing the poll question, I'm just going to say this, and if people would type into the chat if you have the answer for this. In this example of looking for older stuff and asking, is it worth the extra effort? Why did I choose pre-1923 for digital copies of materials? If anybody has any idea, go ahead and type it into the chat, please. And Louise, if we get some responses, let me know.
Yes, we've got lots of people chiming in about copyright and the public domain.
Yay!
Yay.
Wow. You all know way so much more than my faculty here do, or at least the faculty that I talk to. This is great. Yeah, cool, wonderful. Yeah, it's all public domain. And, our history students use a huge number of resources. I think that's the department that orders the most stuff, but we get tons of requests from other people. So we're thinking, and, we weren't terribly successful getting that stuff because it's old. And also, frankly, the quality of the paper is pretty crummy. So we needed to be careful with that. So I went through and I did some analysis on this, basically to say, is it worth it with this stuff? And when I looked at the 466 requests that we got last fiscal year, I figured out that, let's say roughly 50-ish% of those were actually physically sent to us. But when we think about that, it means, yay, we were successful, we got it into the patron's hands, but that takes staff time to process. There's money involved in the shipping and so on and so forth. There's supplies involved. So, that's good, but maybe it could be less effort on our part. About a quarter of the requests were just canceled because the owning library said no, it may have been unique, it may have been in poor condition, any number of different things, but we're still putting staff time into those, probably resubmitting them a couple of times, and ultimately we're not meeting the patron's need. But roughly a quarter, 27%, were available online, so a little bit more staff time up front to see if it's available somewhere, and then make sure that the full version is there. But then we send a link to the patron. They've got the thing faster than if we had to borrow it from a different library, and it's permanent. They don't have to return it, and we don't have to do any processing to get it back to the owning library. So it really, for us, is worth the effort. So, this demonstrates the value of frankly, introducing a more complicated workflow. Are there fewer errors with things? Rollover Beethoven, this takes us back to that whole bugaboo of scores and CDs and so on and so forth. Now the thing is, we knew from talking to the staff in the music library that those patrons were looking in WorldCat to find those things originally. What we didn't have was enough detail, because when they filled out the form and that populated the form in our Iliad system, it didn't have enough information with it. So what we did, knowing that they started in WorldCat, knowing that there obviously therefore was a record in WorldCat and OCLC for the item, we edited the request form so that it brought the OCLC number in. So that way staff could use that to order off of the record that the patron was using, and we knew that we were going to be getting the right thing, and we also knew it was going to be much faster because we weren't spending what seemed like hours trying to wade through all these different records. So it becomes the question of what information does the staff have now that they didn't have before that gives them the ability to do their job better? And is that information that exists so that we can move forward from there? And a lot of this I look at from the standpoint of getting to yes instead of having to cancel a request. I mean, there are points when we have to cancel requests because we just can't get something. But if we can get rid of some of this work that we've been doing otherwise, and we can automate it away, or we can make it easier for ourselves, then that's going to give us time to do other stuff. One of the things that we did here a number of years ago is, we'd always check and see whether we had access to a journal article or not before sending the Interlibrary Loan out. That just makes sense. But what we started doing was just sending the article to the patron. We've got a system in place that will handle that, and honestly, we'd already gone to all of the work of finding it. Why not just provide it to them? Because frankly, as was mentioned as a pain point earlier, articles can be a pain in the neck at times. It's like, it's either simple or you know that you've just gone down that rabbit hole and you're not going to come out for an hour, sort of thing. Other things that we've been able to do, understand that as lenders, we can be the absolute last chance. It's basically that Hail Mary pass, where you have to go out and check the actual physical volume of some sort of obscure title or whatever, or you're the only place that has it, or so on and so forth, or it's something where somebody needs something, so you send an email or you pick up the phone and go, hey, you don't normally send LPs, but would you be willing to do it in this case? Sort of thing. Or also, frankly, there can be a tendency for the ILL staff to get where it's like the reference department can just go, oh, ILL will find it for you, just put a request in. And we do more work potentially. Or doing other things where, we really are the only place that has something like a master's thesis. Because of various changes that we made where a lot of repetitive work that could be automated went away, or increasing the loan period so the lending staff wasn't spending time doing all those renewal updates, we can do other things that we weren't able to before, like scanning entire master's theses. The only place that has it, So why not just scan it so that, again, they've got it and they have it electronically? Because ultimately, in the end, what we want to do is provide better customer service for people and be able to spend our time doing that. So I've got a couple of final thoughts and then finish up with any questions that anybody has. So first thing is, once is not a trend. I once worked for a director who, a single faculty member or a single person would send a cranky email and, suddenly we needed to redo everything and get the library a new outside and everything just because of one person's like, yeah, no. So, and this is a good example of a similar situation. A single cranky faculty member. I'm sure that none of you have cranky patrons. We redesign the website and we get this response. It takes real detective work and it's impossible to find ILL. Well, the new site had been up for months at that point, and we'd gone through the beginning of fall quarter when we had that giant rush of requests coming in, and my response was, yeah, seems to work fine for pretty much everybody else. This is the first complaint that we've gotten. Once is not a trend. So avoid false positives and always evaluate your sources, and do that. And also, when we're doing work redesign, look for the biggest impact for your users. And by users, I mean your patrons and your staff of the library. Everybody should benefit from this sort of stuff. Workflow redesign is really for that 99%. It's for the routine, the common, the easy. Books with ISBN numbers, journal articles where we've got full citations or digital object identifiers and so on and so forth. Things where they only made one version of that. The I want Hamlet. Which one of the 10,000 different versions do you mean sort of thing? That's where the workflow redesign comes in. In many ways, the places that are using consortial, that have consortial catalogs and do your requesting that way, that inherently has done a massive quantity of your work design so that you don't have unnecessary complexities already. In many ways you're in very good shape at this point. Workflow redesign really is not effective for unique and challenging requests because they are just very much that. They're unique. It's going to be something that you handle that way. Or it's, outdated technology. Microfilm was raised as a pain point. Absolutely, if you don't have a microfilm reader printer, it's not going to work terribly well. Although you could always ask for a scan of a specific thing in that case, if it was something small enough. Where you've got multiple records in OCLC or whatever else, I wish they'd come up with a way of fixing that so that we could automate it, but it's just not going to happen. There are points where we still need to have staff and staff time put into things. I would love to have a magical nuclear unicorn that just made ordering newspaper reels of microfilm of newspapers simple and easy, but there just isn't one, and we spend a lot of staff time on it. So those unique or challenging, or there needs to be analysis things, those we can't really do a whole lot of workflow redesign with. And the reason we can't is because they're not generalizable. We can't take and apply things about them to other things, whereas we could do that with a book with an ISBN number. Two of our most unique situations that we had, faculty member in earth sciences, very nice, very bright, frequently interviewed on the radio, but very demanding. Studies earthquakes. Apparently there was an earthquake which caused a tidal wave in the Caribbean at some point in the 1850s, and this tidal wave hit Honduras, and there was a newspaper article about it, and this professor wanted that article and was not going to take no for an answer. So we had to try to trace down a place where we thought owned this particular newspaper, send them an email in Spanish, and then the librarian there filled the interlibrary loan request by finding the newspaper and sending us a picture of the article using his cell phone. And of course, it was the wrong article because the citation that we were given by the faculty member was for like a month before the actual tidal wave happened. So we just introduced the two of them and they could, you know, exchange cell phone pictures back and forth and get us out of it. But you know, that's just such a bizarre story that it's not going to happen again. I can't do workflow redesign around that. In the same way that I also very much hope the Australian government doesn't ever burn any of our books again, because we sent a book to a library that we had worked with at least 10 times in the past, and it somehow got caught in customs off in some quarantine. UPS didn't let us know that it hadn't gotten to them, and it sat there for a month, and apparently the Australian government burned stuff after a month. Who knew? But again, not something I'm going to worry about because I really hope that's a unique situation. So, because I really think in the end, this whole notion of workflow redesign is about making it easy for your patrons, whether they're tuition paying like mine, part of their job doing, i.e. your staff there, or for the public libraries and school libraries, the tax paying patrons. Yeah, that's really what it all comes down to in the end, at least to my mind. So at that point, I'm going to open the chat up to any final questions that people have.
Well, thank you, Kurt. That was really interesting and a lot of food for thought there about workflow redesign. I did have a couple questions, and we do have time. We've got about 10 minutes before we wrap up. So if anyone has any questions for Kurt, we've got time to address them. But Kurt, one that came in a little earlier, the automated request system that you used at Northwestern, is that something that was developed in-house, or do you did you purchase software for that?
It's a multi-part system which at points I worry is something of a house of cards, because if it broke, then I would have to figure out how to fix it. That's why I say house of cards, not because it's like fundamentally unstable. It's a combination of different things. We run our own local installation of Alma, so that's our library system. We don't share one like a lot of other places in the state of Illinois do. So we have our local Alma. On top of our local Alma, we're a development partner with the IDS project out of New York State, and we use their software called IDS Logic to do our local searching and then to work with our Iliad system, which is our management system for interlibrary loan that we use here at Northwestern. IDS Logic does stuff like figures out local availability, does routing of requests, so on and so forth. Then if something is not available at Northwestern because it's either checked out or we simply don't own it, IDS will figure that out for it and then sends it into our consortial borrowing system called UBorrow that the Big Ten uses. There are APIs and web services that automatically send things out through that system. So we didn't build it in-house. It's either a situation where we contracted with companies to create systems and mechanisms that will be able to handle that, or there are other things where, because of our complexity here, we've been asked to, you know, help other places develop stuff.
Gotcha. All right. This is more of a comment than a question. This attendee felt this was very interesting. She liked the screen where you said workflow redesign is for the 99%. And her library is part of SWAN, the Public Library Consortium in the Chicago suburbs, which is very large. So they already have a lot of mechanisms in place to kind of help put that 99%. So then their ILL efforts are really on the unique items. So, so she appreciated that.
Excellent. Yeah, I was head of adult services at the Brookfield Public Library quite a while ago, and then I also was at Concordia. So I worked a lot with SWAN, and back at that point it would have been the suburban library system. And yeah, you're right. It's a very, very, very big system, and it's amazing how much we can automate in very big systems like that. It's sort of the same thing as, I think 80% of what we borrow, we get through our partners in the CIC, the Big Ten. And yeah, it really does give us the ability to then work on those complicated things. So, cool. Thank you for the comment.
All right. And then going back to your slide about the overdue notices, did you find that the overdue notices you were receiving from the other libraries, were they out of sync with your patron overdue notices and it just didn't work? Is that what prompted that extension that you made? Does that make sense?
The extension, making our base lending loan period longer?
Sorry, maybe I didn't read it clear enough. So did you find that the overdue notices were out of sync with your patron overdue system?
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No, that makes more sense. Sorry, brain didn't fire properly. Honestly, I don't know, because we just ignored the lending overdue notices because we knew we were already sending notices to our patrons on the borrowing side.
Right.
I mean, we don't even look at them, and I actually don't know of any other place that uses ILIAD that particularly looks at them. Okay. Because also the standard notices that ILIAD systems send has a standard subject line in it, like first overdue notice, second overdue notice, and then really the only ones that we pay attention to is once we get the bill, because we know that our ILIAD system is automatically sending those overdue notices directly to the patron.
Right.
And it's kind of, if you think of it this way, it's like when I was a kid, like in kindergarten or first grade, and you needed to have a new pencil because you'd used up the pencils that you took to school in the first place, they would pin a note to you to take that home to get it to your parent. If you think about it, sending a lending overdue notice is kind of the same way as telling a 6-year-old, tell your parents this, or tell somebody else this, whereas, we can just send that overdue notice directly to the patron that has our patron that we have control over to say, look, you need to get this back. So it's a more direct mechanism of communication to get to the person who actually has the thing in hand.
All right. Okay. I had a comment or a question come in. This may be specific to the person's consortium, is my guess, but this person said she was under the impression that we could not interlibrary loan material that we own, regardless whether it was checked out. We usually just put a hold on that item for them. So I don't know if you want to comment about that, Kurt. Your system at Northwestern seems a little different than some of our public library consortium system work.
Yeah, I mean, what we do here, every place is different, and I think it's much more of a question of, what's the reasoning behind how places do things. We do a 12-week loan period in our consortial system. You borrow. So if something is checked out from Northwestern, we want to go get a copy from a partner rather than putting a hold on the thing or doing a recall. I can assure you that the 1994, and yes, I know this by heart, book, Critically Thinking About Medical Ethics, or maybe it's 2004. Anyway, Critically Thinking About Medical Ethics, which was published once, is held by 116 libraries on OCLC. There's some faculty member that uses it once a year when they teach a course. Students want interlibrary loans of it. We interlibrary loan those because the rest of them are sitting on the shelves and nobody's using it. So we come to it from that approach, but that has to do, I think, with the type of materials that we're dealing with and also what the loan period is. And it's up to every consortia to set that. If there was a shorter loan period, we were dealing with popular fiction or other things, yeah, we would probably have different rules set up to handle those things. But in our case, when we look at our aggregate data across the entire Big Ten, we find that the vast majority of requests we are able to fill, and most of the time really what we're doing is finally figuring out, again, what public libraries and your consortia figured out 20+ years ago. You can send the whole thing around the consortia and the world's not going to end. So if you have rules in your consortia that say, if you own it locally, put a hold on it, don't interlibrary loan it, I'm sure there are reasons for that. We have chosen to go with a different way of handling those things, but that has to do with our environment and also what our data tells us we can do.
Gotcha. Yeah, and having, in my background, I used to work at a public library. I mean, and as you know, it's very time-consuming and costly to interlibrary loan an item. So if there's a dozen copies in system, it's better for the patron to be patient if they can, rather than spend that extra time and money and effort to try and get it out of system. So,
absolutely.
But you're right. But you're right. Every consortia has their own policies that they make about it. So. All right. Well, I don't have any other questions, and we're right up at 3 o'clock. So thank you so much, Kurt. Appreciate your time today. We did record today's session, so I will process that and get that posted as soon as possible. I just had a question about that, about the webinar. So we'll post that on the Rails website as soon as possible. So thank you, everybody, and thank you again, Kurt.
Oh, very happy to have been able to help. Hopefully I gave you some ideas of things that you can do. More than anything else, it's just go off and think outside of the box, I think. And you've got my contact information, so if you have questions later on, certainly feel free to reach out. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yes, you too. Bye.
Bye.